You've heard of haunted places, but have you ever heard of a place that whispers to you from the shadows? The Hangman Inn isn't just a building, it's a memory, a story, a ghost in the bones of the earth. Nestled in the quiet hills of Vermont, this inn was once a place of celebration, a gathering spot for travelers and locals alike. But time and the weight of history have left their mark. Now, the inn is abandoned, its silence broken only by the wind and the occasional creak of old wood. But some say you can still hear it, the choir, low and mournful, echoing through the halls. The stories say that the choir was once the voices of the townspeople, singing a hymn to mark the passing of a condemned man. But when the last note faded, the voices never left. Some claim the choir still sings at night, when the wind howls and the trees groan like the souls of the dead. If you listen closely, you might hear them soft, haunting, and full of sorrow. So, if you're ever in Vermont and you hear a choir in the distance, don't run. Stop, listen, and remember, some ghosts are waiting for you to finally hear their song. You've heard the name, but let me tell you how it began. The Hangman Inn wasn't always a place of screams and shadows. It started as a modest tavern, run by a man named Elias Whitlock, who had a flair for the dramatic and a love for the bottle. Elias had a reputation for hosting wild revelers, but he also had a soft spot for the lost and the lonely. He often let travelers stay for the night, offering warmth and a place to rest until the tragedies began. Elias tried to cover up, but rumors spread like wildfire. People began to whisper that the inn was cursed, that the dead still lingered in the walls, and that the music played by the ghostly choir was a warning to those who stayed too long. The final blow came when a young girl, no older than 10, was found hanging in the attic. The townsfolk blamed Elias, and he was arrested, but the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Elias was never charged, but the inn was burned to the ground the next morning. The survivors fled, and the land became a wasteland, but the echoes of the choir remained a whisper in the wind, a song that never ends. You remember the way the wind would howl through the trees at dusk, like a lost child calling for its mother. It wasn't just the wind, though it was the way the air seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. The inn itself had a way of looking back. You'd think it was just the way the light hit the stone, but sometimes, the windows would seem to shimmer with a faint, ghostly glow, like eyes watching from the dark. Then came the voices. Not loud, not clear, but a low hum in the air, like a choir of children singing a hymn you'd never heard before. It was the kind of sound that made your skin crawl, even when you couldn't tell what it was. The first time you saw it, you thought it was just a trick of the light, but the figure stood at the edge of the garden, arms outstretched, as though reaching for something or someone that wasn't there. You didn't say a word. You didn't move. You just watched, because you knew that if you turned away, you might never see it again, and that was something you wouldn't wish on anyone. You remember the sound of the wind in the eaves, how it always seemed to hum a tune just before the worst of it came. That night, it wasn't just the wind, it was the voices, low and sweet, like a choir of children whispering secrets in a language only the lost could understand. The caretaker, a man named Elias, said he heard them every night. He told me they were the voices of the children who had been hanged in the cellar below, their spirits trapped in the silence between the strings of the old piano that still sits in the corner. But the night the choir grew louder, something changed. The voices weren't just heard, they were felt. The walls trembled, the floorboards groaned, and the air grew thick with a scent of damp earth and something sweet, like burnt sugar. Elias told me he found the cellar door open the next morning. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, and the floor was littered with small, perfectly formed footprints, leading to a spot where the light didn't reach. He never went back. And then, the disappearances began. First, a young girl who had visited the inn years before, then a boy who had helped Elias with the books. Each time, they vanished without a trace, and the choir grew louder, like it was calling them home. So now, when the wind howls through the rafters, you can almost hear the choir again. But this time, it's not just the children, it's the caretaker, too. And the door to the cellar is still open, waiting for the next voice to join the song. I still remember the night I saw the Hangman Inn's choir. The moon was low, and the trees whispered like old friends. It was a woman, or so I thought, singing a hymn so sweet it made my chest ache. But the more I listened, the more I realized her voice was layered like a choir, but not one I'd ever heard before. It was as though the walls of the inn itself were singing back to her. Then came the laughter, low, like the creak of old wood, and tinged with something sad. It wasn't laughter at me. It was laughter at the world, at time, at the way we all keep walking into the dark. I ran, not because I was afraid, but because I knew if I stayed, I'd be part of the song. The choir didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to join. To this day, I can't explain what I saw, but I can tell you this: the Hangman Inn doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the memory of those who have heard its song. We began with the basics, checking the locks, the wiring, the floorboards. Nothing was broken, nothing was missing, but there was a strange smell, like old wood and something sweetly decayed. The first night, we heard it as soft, rhythmic tapping, like a child tapping fingers against a wooden surface. It started slow, then picked up pace, as if counting something or waiting for someone. We found the ledger in the attic. It was yellowed, brittle, and filled with entries in a shaky hand. The names were familiar, some of the town's oldest families, and the dates, they all ended in the same way. The second night, the tapping changed. It was no longer a rhythm, but a melody, soft, haunting, like a choir singing in a church that had long since closed its doors. By the third night, we were no longer just investigating. We were listening, and the house had started to tell its own story, one that didn't end with the hanged man, but with the ones who never left. You ever wonder why some things just don't make sense? Like the way the wind howls through the rafters at Hangman Inn, but it never sounds like wind at all. It's like a choir, but not a choir, more like a ghostly echo of something long forgotten. The caretaker says it's just old pipes, but he's been there for 30 years. Every time he checks, the sound changes. Sometimes it's a child's laugh. Other times it's a woman's voice, always in a language no one understands. No one knows what the song means, but every time they try to record it, it's different. Like the melody shifts, like it's alive. Some say it's the voices of the people who died there, trapped in the walls, singing for someone to listen. And still, no one has ever found the source. The sound is everywhere and nowhere, like the memory of a song you once knew but can't quite recall. It's the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the stories, but some folks say the real magic is in the town's old-timey taverns. The Hangman Inn's barkeep, old Mrs. Pritchard, still swears she hears the choir every Sunday at dusk. She says the sound comes from the walls, like 100 tiny hands tapping on the wood. Some say the choir is not just music, it's a warning. A local historian told me that in the 1930s, a boy went missing near the inn. His mother claimed he was lured by the sound of singing. The town never found him, but the legend grew from there. Others think it's just the wind, or the echoes of old ballads. But one thing's for sure, no one goes to the inn after dark without a flashlight. And even then, you might hear it. A melody that doesn't belong to this world. The locals call it the Hollow Choir. Some say it's the souls of the forgotten, singing their way out of the darkness. Others say it's just a trick of the light and the mind. But if you listen closely, you might hear something more than just music. You might think the mystery ended with the last hanged man, but it's the silence that haunts the most. No one knows how many were hanged here, or if they were ever truly executed. The town council tried to burn the records, but the old clerk saved them. He died in a fire years later, and the records vanished again, like the ghosts they described. The inn was torn down in the 1950s, but the land is still marked by the old foundation. Locals say you can still hear the voices if you listen closely enough. To this day, no one knows who the last hanged man was. Some say it was a child. Some say it was a woman. The truth, like the ghosts, has long since gone quiet. You've heard the whispers in the rafters, felt the chill of a long-dead song. But sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never quite speak. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You think you've seen the last of the Hollow Choir, but the silence after their song is often the most unsettling sound of all. You might think you're done with the Hangman Inn, but the past has a way of finding you when you least expect it. So as you turn the page, remember this: some stories don't end. They just wait for you to listen again. You've heard of the sea, but have you ever imagined what it looks like from the edge of the world? That's where Mont St. Mitchell sits, a stone sentinel perched on a tidal island, whispering secrets to the waves. It's not just a place, it's a living thing, a relic of faith and fear. This is where the tides come in and where the past refuses to let go. They say the lighthouse was built to guide sailors, but some say it was built to guide the lost, those who wandered too far and never found their way home. And if you listen closely, just as the tide goes out, you might hear the voices of those who once stood where you now stand, waiting for the light to shine again. So, why do we come back to this place, again and again? Is it the light that calls us, or the darkness that follows it? You've heard the name Mont St. Mitchell, but did you know it's not just a church? It's a whole town built on the edge of a tidal island, where the sea comes in like a lover and leaves like a thief. That's the first thing you need to know. Back in the 10th century, a Benedictine monk named Albert had a vision. He said the sea had shown him a hill where a church should rise, so he built the first chapel, and the rest is legend in stone. The town grew around the abbey, and with it came the lighthouse. It was built in the 13th century, but not to guide ships, it was to guide the soul. They said it was a beacon for lost souls, not just for sailors. But not all the stories are about saints and light. Some say the lighthouse was cursed, built on the bones of a drowned sailor. Others say it was built by a sorceress who wanted to trap the sea itself. And then there's the question, who really built it? Was it monks, or was it a secret order of engineers and mystics? The truth is buried in the sand, like the bones of the sea itself. You know how sometimes the wind whispers secrets you don't quite understand? Well, the first sign came as a strange, low hum, like the lighthouse itself was trying to talk to the sea. Then the birds stopped singing. It was like the world had held its breath, waiting for something to happen. I wondered if the tide had changed, or if the wind had just shifted. The caretaker said nothing. He just stared at the light, his face pale, as if he were seeing something we couldn't. I asked if he was okay, and he just nodded, like he was trying to convince himself. That night, I heard a sound like a child crying, but not from the shore. It came from the tower, echoing through the stone like it was trapped inside. I didn't know if it was a dream or something real. And then, I saw it. A figure standing at the top of the tower, silhouetted against the light. It didn't move. It didn't blink. Just stood there, like it had been waiting for someone to notice. You see it now, don't you? That lighthouse, standing alone on the cliffs, its light long extinguished. But the storm didn't break it, it broke something inside the keeper. The keeper, a man named Etienne, was known for his quiet strength. But one night, he vanished without a trace, leaving only his journal and the scent of salt on his pillow. They found his boots at the edge of the cliff, but no body. Just the echo of his footsteps in the sand and a single, unanswered question. Why would a man who loved the sea leave it behind? The villagers say the lighthouse still watches, and that sometimes, on the coldest nights, you can hear Etienne's voice calling from the rocks. But no one dares to go near it anymore. So now, when the wind howls and the waves rise, you might hear it too, a whisper in the gale, a memory in the mist. But do you dare to follow it? You remember the stories from the 1950s, don't you? The fisherman who swore the light didn't blink, just faded. He said the sea whispered through the stones, like it was trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. One woman claimed to see a woman in a white dress standing at the base of the tower, just before a storm. She said the figure didn't move, just watched her like she knew her name. A local priest said he heard the sound of a child's laughter during a service in the 1970s. It was loud, just there, like a memory he couldn't shake. He never told anyone. The most recent account came from a tourist who took a night tour. She said the lighthouse suddenly turned on, blinding her, and when she looked again, the light was gone and the tower was empty. These are not just stories. They're echoes of something that lingers, waiting for someone to listen. And you, dear listener, are still here, still listening. We started the investigation with the basics, checking the archives, interviewing locals, and digging into the old records. The first thing we found was a list of names that didn't add up. The names were of sailors who vanished without a trace. Some were missing for decades, others for just a few months. One of them, a man named Pierre Leclerc, had been reported missing in 1932, but his body was never found. One night, we found a sealed envelope tucked behind a loose brick in the lighthouse's foundation. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting, signed by someone who claimed to have been there in 1947. The letter spoke of a storm so fierce it swallowed the lighthouse whole. The writer said they were the only one left, and that they had heard voices calling from the sea, not from the land. We found more letters, more names, more silence. And with every clue, the lighthouse seemed to grow darker, as though it was waiting for someone to finally listen. You know, there's one thing about the lighthouse that has never been explained, and it's the way the light seems to flicker just before the storm. It's not just a regular flicker, there's something almost intentional about it, like the light is trying to warn someone of something coming. It's as if the lighthouse itself is trying to communicate, but with a language we've never learned, and still, no one has ever been able to explain why the light acts that way or what it's trying to say. You've heard the stories of the lighthouse, but what about the ones the locals still tell? They say the light doesn't just guide ships, it guides the lost souls of those who died in the storm. Some say the light is a ghostly hand reaching out, trying to pull the drowned back to shore. Others claim it's the voice of a woman, calling to her child who vanished in the waves. There's even a theory that the light isn't just a beacon, it's a warning, a signal to those who dare to stay too long. Some say it's the last breath of the lighthouse keeper who died in a fire long ago. These aren't just stories. They're the things people still whisper in the dark, the things they say when the wind howls and the tide rises. You've heard the light. Now, have you heard the silence behind it? You know, sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't about ghosts at all. They're about people who vanish without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. In 1947, a young woman named Helene Lefevre disappeared near the lighthouse, just as the tide was rising. Her last known location was a secluded path that leads straight to the sea. Now, every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, people still gather by the lighthouse, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, of something of a sign that she is still out there, somewhere in the mist. And every year, the wind carries the same question: was she taken by the sea, or did she leave of her own will? Or perhaps she's still waiting for someone to listen. You've heard the whispers of the lighthouse, felt the weight of its watchful gaze, but sometimes the silence is the loudest of all. There's a story in every shadow, and the sea holds more than just waves. It holds memories, regrets, and the echoes of those who vanished. You might think the lighthouse is a place of light, but sometimes it's the darkness that calls to those who linger too long. So, as we turn the page, I leave you with this: what if the light isn't meant to guide you out, but to remind you to stay? And now, my dear friends, we move on to a tale of a place where the past refused to fade, where the walls still remember. You've heard of places that hum with secrets, but the Thompson House? It doesn't just whisper, it howls. You ever been to a place where the air feels like it's holding its breath? That's the Thompson House, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Vermont. Built in the 1870s by a wealthy family who thought they were building a legacy, the Thompson House became a tomb instead. Rumor has it that the last family member left in a hurry, and the house hasn't been the same since. Now, you might think a house this old has seen everything, but the Thompson House has a story that's still unfinished. The locals say you can hear it if you listen closely: echoes of laughter, the sound of a child's voice, and the creak of floorboard that don't exist. Quick word from our sponsor: if this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They say the house is still waiting for someone to come inside and finally close its story. But be warned, once you cross the threshold, you might not be able to leave without hearing its secrets. You know, the Thompson House wasn't always a place of shadows and whispers. It started as a modest home, built in the 1870s by a man named Elias Thompson, a quiet, reserved farmer with a wife named Clara and 2 young children. Elias and Clara were a loving couple, but their marriage wasn't without its struggles. Clara, who had a passion for the arts, often painted in the evenings, while Elias spent his days tending to the land. In a fit of desperation, Elias took matters into his own hands. He gathered some of the town's most respected men, and together they performed a ritual to banish the evil spirits, or so they believed. The ritual didn't go as planned. The next morning, Clara was found dead in the kitchen, her body cold, her hands still clutching the edge of the table. Elias, heartbroken, buried her in the backyard and never spoke of it again. The Thompson House was left to decay, and over time, the story of Clara's death faded into local legend. But the house, it seems, remembered, and it wasn't done with its tale yet. You remember how things started off, don't you? The house was quiet, the snow fell soft, and the silence felt like it was holding its breath. But then, the first crack in the calm came with a sound that didn't belong, like a child's laughter echoing through an empty hall. The next morning, the snow had melted just enough to reveal footprints leading from the front door to the back porch. They were small, and they stopped just short of the gate, as if something had turned back at the last moment. Then came the first real chill. The temperature dropped by a few degrees, and a thermostat flickered, though no one touched it. The air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. And finally, the first real sign that something had been watching: a note left on the kitchen table, written in a child's hand, saying, "Please don't go in the east room." It was just a note, but it made your skin crawl. You ever wonder what happens when a house stops talking and starts whispering? The Thompson House wasn't just haunted, it was holding its breath, waiting for something to finally break. In 1953, the Thompson family vanished without a sound. The father, a quiet man with a love for books and silence, left his wife and 2 young daughters in the middle of a storm. No notes, no signs, just a locked door and a cold, empty house. Neighbors swore they heard voices in the night, but by morning, the house was still. The only thing left was a half-burned matchbook in the kitchen, the words Thompson & Co. still legible, though the name had long been forgotten. They say the house never forgot them. It remembers every breath, every silence, every moment that was left unsaid. And now, it waits for someone to finally listen. One of the earliest accounts came from a young woman named Clara, who claimed she heard the Thompsons' laughter echoing through the halls long after they were buried. She said it was like the house was remembering them. She described the house as alive, with walls that seemed to breathe and floors that hummed beneath her feet. It was as if the past had not been buried, but waiting. Another witness, an elderly man who once lived next door, swore he saw a figure in the window of the Thompson house, dressed in 19th century clothes, watching the street like a ghost in mourning. He said the figure never moved, never spoke, but its presence made the air feel heavier, like the weight of a secret that had been buried for too long. Some say the Thompson house remembers, not in words, but in whispers and shadows. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. The first clue came from a faded diary page, tucked inside a floorboard. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. The walls remember what we forget. It was written in a shaky hand, as if the writer had been shaking all the time. The investigators found a hidden room beneath the cellar, sealed off for decades. The air was colder than the rest of the house, and the walls seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. They uncovered a collection of old photographs, all of the same woman, always in the same corner of the house, always wearing the same dress. The images were taken over a span of 30 years, yet she never aged. One of the investigators reported hearing a faint whisper at night, just before waking. It wasn't a voice, but a sound like someone breathing, very close, like the woman was in the room, but not in the room. The most unsettling find was a child's toy, untouched, sitting in the corner of the attic. It was a wooden rocking horse covered in dust, but perfectly preserved, like time had paused just for it. Every time they tried to document the house, something changed. The same room, the same objects, but the atmosphere shifted, as if the house itself was watching, waiting for the right moment to speak. You see it now, don't you? That one detail that doesn't fit. The thing that's been gnawing at the edges of every story, every report, every whisper. It's the one thing that's never been explained. It's the missing key, the unspoken clue, the moment that's been swallowed by silence. No one dares ask, no one dares say, but it's there, buried in the dust of history, waiting for someone to notice. The investigators, the historians, the skeptics, they all agree on one thing: there's no proof, no evidence, no explanation. Just a gap in the story, a void that no one dares fill. So we ask you, dear listener, what if that gap is the truth? What if the one detail that has never been explained is the only thing that matters? And what if it's waiting for you to find it? You've heard the stories, but have you ever asked yourself, what if the Thompson house wasn't just haunted, but cursed? Some say the family's greed turned the home into a tomb. Local historians say the original owner, Elias Thompson, built the house to outshine his rivals, but the land itself seemed to resist him. Some say the spirits of the previous owners still guard the place. There's a theory that the house is a time capsule of tragedy, holding the echoes of every soul who ever lived there. Some say the walls remember, and the cold is just the house holding its breath. But not all stories are grim. Some say the Thompson house is a place where the past and present collide, and if you listen closely, you can hear the laughter of children who never grew up. The real mystery isn't whether the house is haunted, it's why the echoes still linger. Maybe the house isn't trying to scare you. Maybe it's trying to tell you something. You know, sometimes the real horror isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows. The Thompson house still stands, but the people who lived there, they are all gone, and no one ever really knew what happened. The last letter from the house was sent in 1953, a simple note, written in a shaky hand saying, "We're not coming back." The postmark was from the same town, but no one could find the sender. The town tried to move on, but the house never did. Every year, the same questions come up: where did they go? What happened to the children? And why does the wind always sound like laughter coming from the upstairs rooms? And now, as the years pass, the town is asking the same questions again. No one's ever found the answers, and the house still waits, waiting for someone to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunting echoes aren't the ones you hear, but the ones you feel in your bones. The Thompson house whispers, but it also listens. There's a silence in the house that doesn't mean nothing's there, it means everything is. You might not hear the ghost, but you'll feel its memory. And sometimes, that's enough to make the hair on your neck stand up. But don't worry, dear listener, we've got more stories to share. Just remember, the house never forgets. Neither do we. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place whispered about in the shadows of history, where secrets lay buried deeper than the roots of the old oaks. It was once a sanctuary, a place of learning and mysticism, but now it stands as a relic of the past, silent, still, and steeped in a darkness that refuses to fade. Some say the priory was cursed by the very knowledge it protected, that the blood of the last guardians still lingers in the stones, waiting for the right hands to awaken the past. But what exactly was hidden here? And why does the wind still carry the echoes of those who once called this place home? You ever wonder how a place like the Priory of Sion came to be? It wasn't built by accident. It was crafted by a group of scholars, mystics, and visionaries who believed in the power of knowledge and the hidden codes of the world. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Hours Tumblr. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. These were the Templars, you see. Not the ones you read about in the movies, but a secretive order who guarded secrets of the Holy Grail and the sacred geometry of the world. They believed the world was built on sacred numbers and symbols. Over time, the Priory became a place of intrigue, of hidden truths and whispered betrayals. Some say the Templars hid the Grail within its walls. Others say they were betrayed and their legacy was erased by those who feared what they knew. And so the legend grew, not just of a place but of a legacy, a hidden history that still lingers in the stones and shadows. The Priory of Sion was more than a monastery. It was a mystery waiting to be uncovered. You remember the way the wind used to whistle through the trees, like a whispering ghost trying to tell you something. But lately, it's been quieter, almost like it's holding its breath. The roses at the gate had always been the Priory's pride, but now they've turned to blackened thorns. You could almost swear they were reaching for you. The caretaker said it was just the damp, but you noticed the stones near the well had started to glow faintly at dusk, like a dying ember flickering in the dark. Even the birds had stopped singing. You asked the priest if there was a plague or something, and he just smiled and said, "Not all silence is a blessing, my dear." One night, you woke to the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the halls. It wasn't the children you'd heard playing earlier, but something else entirely. You started to feel like the Priory was watching you, not with eyes, but with something older, something that had been waiting for you to come back. You know, sometimes the most chilling moments aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence. The kind that stretches so long, it feels like the house is holding its breath. One night, a young monk named Brother Alaric vanished without a trace. The bells rang for his funeral, but no body ever turned up. Just a cold, empty bed and a note written in his own hand, saying, "I must go where the light cannot reach." The monks never spoke of it again, but in the silence, you can almost hear the echo of his footsteps, fading into the stone like a ghost trying to find its way back. And to this day, if you listen closely, you can still hear him just outside the walls, walking the same path he took all those years ago, searching for something he was never meant to find. I remember the first time I heard about the Priory of Sion. It was a quiet evening, and my neighbor, Mrs. Lang, was telling me about her late husband's obsession with the place. He'd spent years chasing rumors of hidden manuscripts and whispered secrets. He'd said the Priory was cursed, that the air there was thick with the weight of ancient wrongs. He told me about the cold spots and the whispers that followed him when he visited alone. He said they were not just stories. One of the most chilling accounts came from a retired librarian named Eleanor Whitmore. She claimed she saw a figure in the garden, a woman in a long black dress, standing beneath the old oak tree, never moving, never speaking, just watching. She told me that the figure vanished the moment she tried to approach, leaving only a single white rose on the ground. A symbol, she said, of something waiting to be uncovered, and something that had been waiting a very long time. These stories, these accounts, they're not just folklore. They're fragments of something larger, something that lingers in the places where history and the unseen collide. We followed the trail of whispers to a dusty archive in the hills where the scent of old paper and mildew clung to the air like a ghostly sigh. The librarian, a woman with silver hair and eyes that saw more than they let on, handed us a folder wrapped in faded blue paper. Inside, we found letters written in a shaky hand, filled with panic and desperation. They spoke of a hidden room beneath the chapel, where the air was cold and the walls whispered in a language long forgotten. The deeper we dug, the more the past seemed to reach out. We found a map marked with strange symbols, leading us to a forgotten crypt where the stones still hummed with the echoes of a long-buried secret. But the most unsettling thing was not the map, it was the name scrawled in the margins, a name that should have been erased from history. We had found more than we expected. We had found a thread that led back to the present. You know, the thing that's always bugged me is the one detail that has never been explained. No one seems to know why the Priory of Sion was built in the first place. It's like they just appeared, like a mirage in the French countryside. It's not like they left any records. No official documents, no blueprints, no mention in any royal decree. Just this silence. Like the Priory was built by ghosts, not men. So, what was the purpose? A sanctuary? A prison? A secret society? No one knows? And that's what makes it so creepy. It's like the Priory was built by people who didn't want to be found. You think about it, don't you? That one little thing that's just missing. The one detail that's never been explained. Like the Priory was built in a hurry, or by people who didn't want to leave a trace. And yet, it still stands, waiting, watching, like it's never going to be explained. And maybe it never should be. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the Priory of Sion isn't just a relic of the past, but a place where time folds in on itself and the dead still walk these halls. Some say the monks who lived there were cursed by the very knowledge they protected. Others claim the priory was built on the bones of an ancient druidic site and the spirits still guard its secrets. Local historians say the priory was destroyed in the 15th century, but some insist they've seen lights flickering in the night and the sound of chanting coming from the ruins long after the sun has set. Even today, the local elders tell stories of the priory's last monk, who vanished without a trace. Some say he was taken by the spirits, others say he still walks among us, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. You know, sometimes the hardest part of a mystery isn't the crime itself, but the silence that follows. No bodies, no answers, just a whisper of something wrong that never quite goes away. The last known witness to the events of 1967 vanished without a trace. They were last seen walking the path that leads to the old chapel, clutching a faded photo of a man who never existed. And now, the priory stands quiet again, its secrets locked behind rusted gates and the weight of time. But if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of a voice calling from the shadows. So, what do you think? Is the mystery a warning, a lesson, or just a story that refuses to be forgotten? Or is it something far more dangerous than we can ever understand? You've walked through centuries of shadows, but remember, the past doesn't stay buried. It whispers through the stones, through the trees, through the silence between the stories. What if the real horror isn't the ghost, but the truth it hides? Some say the priory isn't just a place, it's a mirror to the secrets we refuse to face. What would you do if the past knocked on your door, and you had to answer? We tell stories to remember, to honor, to keep the dark from winning. But sometimes, the dark wins anyway, and sometimes it's waiting for you to listen. So, as we close this chapter, let's not forget, the past is never truly gone. It just waits, patient and quiet, for the right moment to stir. And sometimes, that moment is now. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a new tale to tell. One that's waiting in the wings, just like the past. Shall we step into the next story together? You've heard of St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the US, but have you ever heard of the crypt beneath its oldest church? It's a place where time seems to stop, and the air is thick with secrets. The church was built in the 1500s, but the crypt? That's a different story. It's been sealed for centuries, and the locals say it's not just a tomb, it's a place where the dead still walk. Some say the crypt was sealed after a priest disappeared without a trace, and the last few people who entered never left. Others whisper that the air inside smells like old blood and something sweet like a forgotten wedding cake. But the real mystery is this: no one has ever been able to open the crypt door. Not the church, not the town, not even the people who live there. It's like the ground itself is holding its breath. So, what do you think? Is it a place of prayer or a prison for the souls who were never meant to be buried? Or is it something worse? Something that's waiting for you to come closer. You know, the church was built in the 1600s, but the crypt was dug much later, around the early 1800s. It was a time of great change, and the church needed a place to store the bones of those who had died in the wars. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They brought in the bodies, wrapped in cloth, and laid them to rest in the crypt. But the priest had a plan. He wanted to keep the most powerful people in the church alive, even after they were dead. The priest wasn't just a man of God, he was a man of power. And power, when it goes too far, can turn into something darker. He began to experiment with the dead, believing they could be used for his own ends. But the dead aren't always easy to keep. They begin to whisper. They begin to move. And the priest, who once held all the power, found himself trapped by the very thing he had tried to control. And so, the crypt became a place of both reverence and fear. The church still stands, but the stories of what happened there, of what still lingers, have been passed down like a whispered secret, waiting to be heard. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It wasn't a loud crash or a scream, just a flicker in the candlelight, like the shadows were dancing with a will of their own. The priest had warned us that the crypt was old, that the air there felt different, like it held secrets too heavy for the earth to bear. Then came the whispers, not from the walls, but from the air itself, as if the crypt was speaking through the dust and the decay. The first real clue was the scent, not of decay, but of something sweet and floral, like a memory from a long-lost childhood, but with a tinge of something wrong. And then, just as the priest closed the door behind us, a single candle on the altar sputtered and died, without a match in sight. You know, some of the most chilling moments aren't about ghosts at all, but about what happens to people who vanish without a trace. In 1968, a young woman named Margaret Delaney disappeared from the grounds of St. Augustine Church, and no one ever found her. The last person to see her was a nun who claimed Margaret had gone into the crypt to pray and never came back. To this day, the crypt remains sealed, and no one dares to open it, not even the priests who say they hear her voice at midnight, calling for help. So, if you're ever wondering near St. Augustine Church, maybe you should ask yourself, what would you do if you heard a voice calling from the dark? I spoke to a woman who lived across the street from the crypt for 30 years. She said the air there smells like damp earth and something sweet, like burnt sugar. She never told me what it was, but she said it was there, always. One night, she said, she heard a child's laughter coming from the crypt. It wasn't loud, just soft like a whisper. She went to look, but the door was locked. She never told anyone, but she said she heard it again the next week. Another man, a former groundskeeper, said he saw a child running through the graveyard one evening. He said it wasn't a real child, just a shadow with a small, red dress. He said he followed it for a while, but it always disappeared before he got close. He said the child never spoke, never stopped, and never looked back. He said it was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection was always a little off. He said he still dreams about it, and he's not sure if it's a memory or something else. These stories don't make sense, but they're real. They're told with such quiet conviction, like they're part of the same old, familiar story we all know but can't quite remember. And sometimes, that's the scariest part. We started with the old parish records, yellowed and brittle. The ink faded like the memory of the ones who wrote them. You can almost hear the whispers of the past in the rustle of those pages. One name kept coming up: Father Miguel. He was the last priest to serve here, and he vanished without a trace in the early 1970s. No body, no clues, just silence and a church that seemed to hold its breath. The deeper we dug, the more we found names of women who had died in the crypt, some of them never even buried. Their stories were quiet, but their absence was loud, like a ghost knocking on the door of the present. There were even rumors of a hidden chamber beneath the crypt, said to be sealed since the 1800s. No one had seen it in over a century, but the air in this place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to push the door open. One night, we found a small, hand-carved wooden box in the back of the church, filled with letters written in a woman's hand. She never spoke of the crypt, but she wrote about the silence that follows the last prayer. The box was a whisper, a relic, a reminder that some stories don't end. They just wait, in the dark, for someone to listen. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me is that no one ever figured out what happened to the little girl's doll. It was found in the crypt, just a few feet from where the body was discovered, but it was never explained. What did it mean? Was it a clue, a warning, or just a cruel joke? The doll was the only personal item found with her. No wallet, no jewelry, just this tiny thing that seemed to have belonged to her. It's like the crypt knew her name, but not her story. And you know what's really strange? The doll's ribbon was the same color as the girl's hair. Just like she was, the doll was left behind. Like the crypt wanted to say, you were here, you were real, but now you're gone. It's the one thing they never solved. The doll, the ribbon, the silence. It's like the crypt wants us to wonder, not to know. And that's what makes it so haunting. Some say the crypt isn't just a tomb, it's a place where the living are invited to play. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered if the ghosts are just the ones who stayed behind? Old Mrs. Delaney used to tell me that the crypt has a voice. A low, mournful hum that only the most sensitive ears can hear. She said it's the church trying to remember its dead. Some folks believe the crypt is a kind of portal, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is thin and the past is never truly buried. I've heard some say the crypt is haunted by the sorrow of the unwed, that the last priest who officiated a marriage here still walks the halls, looking for the one he never married. And then there are the ones who say the crypt is not haunted at all, it's just waiting for someone to come back and find out what really happened there. You've heard the stories, but what about the silence that follows? The church has its own way of keeping secrets, and some say the crypt is still waiting for someone to listen. The last search for the missing boy was nearly 70 years ago. The priest who led it has since passed, and the records have been lost to time, like the boy himself. No one has stepped foot in that crypt since the last search. The church is quiet now, but the silence is thick, like the air just before the first snowfall. And so, the mystery remains, not as a tale to scare you, but as a question that lingers in the dark. What if the boy never left? What if he is still waiting for someone to come back? The story may be old, but the truth is still buried. And sometimes, the truth won't let you go. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. The silence in that crypt was louder than any scream. And sometimes, the ghosts don't need to speak. They just need to be remembered, to be heard, to be seen. So, as we turn the page, let's not forget that every story has its own quiet, haunting truth. And if you ever feel a chill, a whisper, or a flicker of light in your own home. Maybe it's just a ghost saying hello. Now, let's move on and see what other stories are waiting to be told. You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what it looked like before it became a prison? Picture a stone fortress, its spires piercing a gray sky, surrounded by the Thames. It's not just a castle, it's a place where history bleeds into legend. Back in the 1400s, it was more than a royal residence, it was a place of power, betrayal, and blood. The White Tower, with its cold, unyielding stone, held more than just kings. It held secrets, and some say, souls. But it wasn't just the prisoners who suffered. The keepers, the guards, the servants, they all had their own stories. Some say the tower is haunted by the ghosts of those who were never allowed to leave. And then there are the ballads, songs passed down through generations, sung in low voices, about the blood that soaked the stones. These aren't just tales, they're warnings, laced with sorrow and mystery. So, what do you think? Is the tower a place of history, or a place where the past refuses to stay buried? Or maybe it's both. You know, the tower began as a fortress, a place of power, but it was also a place of blood. The first stone was laid in 1078 by William the Conqueror, who had just taken over England. You can almost imagine the sound of hammers and the scent of wet mortar in the air. But it wasn't just a castle. It was a prison, a place where the powerful were kept, and the powerful were often executed. The Bloody Tower, built later, became the site of many dark events, including the mysterious death of young princes. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The tower was also a place of execution, where nobles and traitors were put to death. You can picture the gallows, the noose, the weight of fear in the air. It was a place where history was written in blood. And then there were the prisoners. Some were held for years, some for decades. You can almost hear their whispers, their pleas, their despair echoing through the cold stone corridors. But the tower's story isn't just about death. It's about power, betrayal, and the secrets that were buried beneath its stones. And somehow, those secrets still whisper through the air. You remember how the first whispers of trouble came, like a faint echo in the stone. The servants began to murmur about the air growing colder in the east wing, and the roses in the garden turning black before they bloomed. The cook claimed the meat turned to ash in the oven, and the stable boy swore the horses would not move unless they were led by a ghostly hand. The keepers started to sleep with their hands over their faces, as if fearing a touch from the dark. Then came the first scream, a woman's cry, sharp and sudden, echoing through the halls. No one knew who it belonged to, but it lingered like a broken bell, rattling the bones of those who heard it. The next day, the body was found in the privy. A woman, her face untouched by time, yet her eyes staring straight into the heart of the watcher. No one could say how she got there, or why she remained, her spirit tethered to the stones. And so the tower began to whisper again, not in words, but in the silence between them. The first signs of something terribly wrong had been set, and the dark had begun to take root in the very walls. You've heard the tales of the crown jewels and the Bloody Tower, but what about the night the crown prince vanished without a trace? It was a summer evening, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and a hush of a kingdom holding its breath. The prince was last seen in the great hall where the king had just held court. His brother, the Duke of York, was there too, and the tension between them was as thick as the smoke from the hearth. Some say they argued over the throne. Others say the prince was taken by fate or by a hand unseen. The prince never returned to his chambers, and no one saw him again. Some say he fled in the night. Others say he was smuggled out by a trusted servant. But the tower held him all the same. You can still feel his presence in the silence between the creaks of the ancient beams. The mystery of his disappearance lingers like the scent of a ghostly perfume. No one knows for sure what happened that night, but the tower remembers. And if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of a young prince's last sigh, lost in the stone. I met an old sailor who said he saw the tower in a dream, its stones weeping blood. He swore the sound of a child's laughter echoed through the halls, and the walls were warm, not cold. A woman in London told me she saw a ghostly figure in the courtyard, wearing a 16th century dress, her hands clasped in prayer. She said the figure never moved, just stood there like a silent plea. A tour guide once told me about a child who wandered into the crypt, and when she returned, her eyes were wide with fear. She said the floor was warm, and the air smelled like something sweet and wrong. A historian once told me that the walls still remember, that the tower is not just a place, but a memory, a prison, a song that never ends. It sings in the wind, in the stones, in the silence. And so, we listen, not to the screams, but to the silence, to the whispers in the wind, to the stories that refuse to die, clinging to the stones like blood to a wound. Because the tower doesn't just hold ghosts, It holds the weight of 1,000 lives and the truth of 1,000 lies. And sometimes, the truth is the most terrifying thing of all. We followed the whispers of the past through narrow alleyways and past the crumbling stone walls. The tower's secrets were not just in its stones, but in the dust and the echoes that lingered in the air. In the archives, we found letters written in trembling hands talking about voices in the night and the weight of a crown that never fit. It was as if the past had not moved on, but had settled into the walls. We found a journal, its pages filled with ink and fear, describing a girl who had vanished without a sound. Her name was never spoken, but her story was etched into the very stones of the tower. And then, the strange things began: footsteps in empty halls, whispers in the wind, and a feeling that the tower was watching us, waiting for us to remember what it had already forgotten. We left with more questions than answers and a deeper sense of the weight of history. The tower does not just hold the past, it holds the present too. You've heard the stories of the White Princess, the Traitor's Gate, the crown jewels. What's left unsaid? What's the one thing that haunts the tower more than the ghosts? It's not the blood. It's not the crowns. It's the silence. They say the tower holds more than just history. It holds the weight of every secret, every betrayal, every life lost in its shadow. But the real question is, what did they never tell us? What truth was buried so deep? Even the stones forgot. Some say it was a child. Some say it was a servant. Some say it was a lover. What no one knows. No one ever will. Because the tower doesn't let go of its secrets, especially not the ones that don't belong to history. So, what do you think? Was it a warning? A punishment? A lesson? Or was it just a name that never got to be remembered? The tower holds its breath, waiting for someone to ask the question it's been asking for centuries. In the end, the tower doesn't need answers. It just needs silence. And you, my dear listener, are still listening. Are you? Some say a tower's ghosts are just the echoes of love and loss trapped into walls like old songs. You ever wonder what kind of love could make a woman stay in a place where even the stones seem to remember her name? There's a story about a noblewoman who loved a man too high for her. She stayed in the tower, not as a prisoner, but as a lover. Her name is lost to time, but her heart is said to still beat in the walls. Others say the blood in the tower is not just from the past, it's from the present. People still come here, seeking answers, or just to feel the weight of history on their shoulders. You ever feel like the past is breathing down your neck? Some say the tower doesn't just hold the memories of the dead, it holds the regrets of the living. And if you listen closely, you might hear their voices whispering through the stones, asking for forgiveness. Even now, the tower is a place where history and myth blur. Some say the blood has been washed away, but others say it still stains the stones. And if you ever walk through those gates, you might hear a psalm, old, mournful, and full of longing. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that never quite end. The Tower of London has its ghosts, but some mysteries just refuse to be laid to rest. There are whispers of a vanished noblewoman, a secret lover, and a murder that was never solved. But the real question is, who really knows what happened that night? The crown jewels still sit in their gilded cases, but what about the secrets they once held? Some say the tower guards more than just treasure. You might think the tower is just a relic of the past, but there are those who still hear the whispers of the past echoing through its halls. And so, the story lingers, not in the pages of a book, but in the silence between the stones. The tower still watches and the mystery remains. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper like the wind through the stones of the tower. And just like that, the tower fades into the night, leaving only the echo of a ghostly lullaby in the air. But here's the thing, dear listener, sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It just waits like a forgotten song for the right moment to rise again. So as you turn the page, remember what's next might not be as quiet as this, but it will be just as real. Now, let's move on to the next tale, one that's older than the tower itself and far more haunted. You ever wonder what happens when a library gets too big? Well, the National Library of France in Paris has more books than you can imagine, and some say it's not just books that lie there anymore. This place has been around since the 17th century, but it's the 19th century expansion that gave it that eerie, almost haunted feel, like it's holding its breath. They say the books here are cursed, not because they are evil, but because they hold secrets that refuse to stay buried, secrets that sometimes come back to haunt the people who read them. The librarians here have stories of whispers in the stacks, doors slamming shut on their own, and the feeling of being watched, even when they're alone in the vast silence. So, what do you think? Is it the weight of centuries of knowledge, or something older and darker that's been waiting for the right moment to speak? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, The National Library of France isn't just a place for books, it started as a refuge for the very first French thinkers, the ones who dared to question the church and the crown. You ever think about how one idea can change the world? Well, that idea was born here, in these very halls. It began in the 17th century, when King Louis Roman XIV wanted to centralize all the knowledge of the realm. He gathered scholars, philosophers, and poets, some of the brightest minds of the time. But not everyone was pleased with this new order. You know how sometimes, in the quietest moments, a book just feels wrong? The one you picked up for a quick read, but it's like it's been waiting for you. The spine is cracked, the page is brittle, and the ink seems to shimmer like it's alive. One evening, the librarian who worked the late shift found a book she hadn't seen in years, placed just where it had been before. She laughed it off, but when she opened it, the pages fluttered like they had a mind of their own. The next morning, the librarian found her own name written in the margin of the book, written in her handwriting, but the page had been blank the night before. She tried to laugh it off again, but the book had begun to whisper, not in words, but in a way that made her skin crawl, like the pages were breathing. And then she heard it, her own voice, coming from the book, saying something she didn't remember ever saying. You remember the silence, don't you? The kind that hangs in the air like a veil, thick and heavy, as if the building itself holds its breath. It's not the silence of an empty room, it's the silence of something waiting. One morning, the librarian found the desk empty, not just empty, but as if the chair had been pulled out, the papers scattered, and the silence had deepened like the room had been emptied of its soul. They searched for hours, but there was no trace of her, just a faint smell of lavender in the air, and a single, unmarked envelope left on her desk. No note, no explanation, just the scent of a vanished person. The library staff never spoke of it again. They said she was never really there, that she was just a ghost in the archives, a memory woven into the silence. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, you can still feel her. I've spoken to several researchers who say they've heard the same thing, this low, humming sound that seems to come from the stacks. It's not loud, but it's persistent, like the library itself is breathing. One woman told me she once found a book that was already open, pages turned to a specific chapter about a long-dead librarian. She says the ink was still wet when she opened it. Another librarian said she saw a figure in the stacks one night. It was tall, in a dark coat, and didn't move when she looked directly at it. Just stood there, waiting. Some say the books whisper when no one is around. Others say they're just the wind. But if you listen closely, you might hear something that sounds like a name just once, and then it's gone. It's hard to say what exactly is waiting in those archives, but the stories keep coming, and they all seem to point to one thing: the library is alive, and it remembers. We followed the trail of whispers deeper into the archives, where the air grew heavier, and the silence became a living thing. You ever notice how some places feel like they're holding their breath? The deeper we went, the more the walls seemed to lean in, like they were listening. And then, we found it a hidden room, sealed behind a forgotten door, covered in a layer of spiderwebs and time. Inside, the air was cold, and the silence was deafening. There were no books, just a single chair and a desk, as if someone had left in a hurry, or never returned at all. But then we found something strange, a stack of notebooks, unmarked, their pages filled with scribbles in a language I didn't recognize. It felt like the room was trying to tell us something, but in a language we couldn't understand. And then, we saw a single name scrawled in the margin of one page, a name that didn't belong to anyone we'd ever met. It felt like the room had reached out to us, whispering a secret we weren't ready to hear. You know, the one thing that's always baffled researchers is the missing inkwell. It was found in the archives, but the ink inside had dried up like it had been there for centuries. They tried to replace it, but the new ink always vanished the moment it touched the page, like some unseen hand had a vendetta against it. And the most chilling part? No one has ever seen the ink disappear. It just does. Like the library is alive, and it doesn't want to be disturbed. So the question remains, was it a curse, or just the library remembering what it once held? And if it remembers, does it ever forget? You've heard the stories, but what about the people who still believe them? The librarians, the archivists, the ones who have seen things no one else has. Some say they hear whispers in the stacks at night, like someone is trying to find their way through the dark. There are rumors of books that refuse to be checked out. Some say they vanish, only to reappear days later, their pages filled with new, illegible writing. Others claim they were never there at all. It's hard to tell which is more unsettling. The locals say the archives are protected by more than just locks and security. They whisper of old French curses, of books that were once written in blood, and of a library that remembers everything, even the things that were never meant to be remembered. Some say the library is alive, not in the way you'd expect. but in a way that feels real. It's not just the stories, it's the people, the history, the very air that seems to hum with something ancient and waiting. There's a silence in the archives that isn't just still. It's like the books themselves are holding their breath, waiting for something to break the spell. And yet, the mystery isn't just in the silence. It's in the way the dust doesn't settle, and the light doesn't reach the corners like the library is holding its own secrets close. Some say the archives are haunted by the voices of those who once searched for the truth and never found it. Others say the truth was never there to begin with. But what if the real curse isn't the ghosts, it's the idea that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, that some stories are just meant to linger. So, dear listener, do you believe the library holds the answers, or is it the questions that are truly cursed? You walked through the hush of ancient shelves, where whispers cling to the dust like secrets waiting to be unearthed. But sometimes, the silence is the loudest of all. There's a comfort in knowing the past is just out of reach, and that some stories are meant to linger in the quiet spaces between the pages. And as you turn the page, the next story waits like a shadow that's always been there, just waiting for you to look. So, what will you find next? The next tale is just a page away. You've heard of the Alhambra, that Moorish jewel in the southern Spanish hills. But have you ever wondered what secrets lie in its winding halls, where time seems to pause and the echoes of the past refuse to fade? This isn't just a palace, it's a labyrinth, a place where the echoes of love and loss still linger, where the air is thick with the weight of history and the ghosts of forgotten lovers. Legends say that the Alhambra was built on the bones of an ancient city, and every corner holds a whisper of the past of rulers, lovers, and the cruel fates that shaped their lives. Some say the palace is haunted by the spirits of those who died in its halls, mothers who lost their children, lovers who were torn apart, and rulers who met their end in the very rooms where their stories began. But what if the true curse isn't the ghosts, but the labyrinth itself? What if the palace is trying to protect its secrets, and the only way out is through the stories it won't let you forget? The Alhambra began as a fortress, a place of power and pride, but it was not built by kings alone. It was built by hands, by minds, by souls who dreamed of a paradise on earth. It was the Nasrid emirs who first called this place home. They turned it into a palace of art, of poetry, of gardens that whispered secrets to the wind. But even in paradise, there are shadows. The Alhambra was not just a palace, it was a place where power was tested, where love and betrayal walked hand in hand. The emirs, their wives, their poets, their servants, all were part of this grand tapestry. And in the end, even the most beautiful places can become haunted by their own history. So when the Nasrids fell, and the Alhambra passed into foreign hands, it wasn't just a palace that changed, it was a soul that shifted, leaving behind a labyrinth of memory and mystery. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right, a shadow that didn't belong, a silence that lingered too long, like the air itself had been holding its breath. It started with the whispers so soft, so far away, like someone had forgotten to turn off the radio in the next room. You tried to laugh it off, to tell yourself it was just old buildings and overactive imaginations. But the Alhambra has a way of making you feel like you're being watched. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And then, one evening, you heard a sound like footsteps, but no one was there, and the silence that followed was louder than anything you'd ever known. You see it now, don't you? The grand hall, echoing with the weight of centuries, where the silence is louder than any sound. In that hall, a royal prince vanished without a trace. The court was in chaos, the whispers of betrayal louder than the truth. They say he was taken by the palace itself, by the walls that remembered every secret, every lie, every forgotten wish. No one knows where he went, but the palace has never let go of him, and it's still waiting for someone to find him. I once met a woman who claims she wandered the Alhambra at night, and the walls whispered her name. She says the corridors led her deeper than she intended, and the stones seemed to hum with a presence she could not name. She told me the air grew colder the further she walked, and the silence was so thick she could hear her own breath. When she turned back, the path was gone, and the palace had become a maze of its own will. Another visitor swore she saw a shadow move in the halls, too human to be a wall painting, too still to be a person. She ran, but the doors were locked, and the palace seemed to breathe with her panic. There's a story, too, of a man who claimed to hear a child's laughter echoing through the halls. He said it was the ghost of a lost princess, trapped between the walls of the palace she could never escape. These are not just stories. They are echoes of something deeper, something that lingers in the spaces between memory and myth. And if you ever find yourself wandering the Alhambra at night, I hope you're not alone. We followed the trail of whispers through the palace's crumbling halls, where even the dust seemed to remember the past. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something ancient. One of the investigators found a hidden chamber behind a tapestry, its walls lined with faded, hand-painted symbols that looked like they were meant to warn, not guide. In the archives, we found old letters written in a trembling hand talking about a labyrinth of sorrow and a ghost that moves through the dark like a shadow with a heart. It was in the gardens that we saw the strangest thing, a flower blooming in a spot where no flowers should grow, its petals glowing faintly in the dusk. And then, just as we turned to leave, the wind picked up, and for a moment, it seemed the palace itself was breathing. You know, there's one thing about the Alhambra that has never been explained. Not the ghosts, not the disappearances, but this one detail that haunts the scholars more than the spirits themselves. It's not the architecture, not the carvings, not even the whispers in the halls. It's the fact that no one seems to remember who built the labyrinth in the first place. It's as if the labyrinth was never meant to be claimed by anyone. As if it was built for a purpose that no one living could understand, and that purpose has been swallowed by the silence of the past. And that, my dear listener, is the one thing that has never been explained. Not by the historians, not by the locals, not even by the ghosts who still walk these halls. Just a mystery that lingers like a shadow. You know, some say the labyrinth isn't just stone and shadow, it's a living thing. They whisper, the walls shift when no one's watching, and the air hums with old, angry voices. Have you ever felt the Alhambra watching you back? The locals still tell of a ghost who roams the halls, a woman with a broken heart, lost in time. Some say she's the daughter of a Moorish prince, others say she was a lover betrayed by the Spanish crown. But no one knows for sure. There's also the theory that the labyrinth was built not just to impress the world, but to trap something or someone inside. A prison for the soul of a king, or a maze for the soul of a ghost. Some say it still holds them. And then there are the disappearances. A few tourists, a few locals, and always they vanish in the labyrinth. No footprints, no traces, just silence where there should be sound. So, as you wander the halls, remember this: the Alhambra doesn't just hold history, it holds memory, longing, and a kind of love that time can't erase. And sometimes, it holds something that won't let go. There's still no clear answer to what happened in the Alhambra's deepest chambers. Some say it was a ritual, others a tragedy, but the silence of the stone speaks louder than any tale. Artifacts from the 16th century still lie buried in the gardens, half buried in the earth. No one has dared to dig them up, fearing what they might find. Some believe the labyrinth is alive, shifting and changing with the seasons. It's said to lead to places that don't exist anymore, or to memories that shouldn't be remembered. And so, the Alhambra remains both a monument and a mystery, a place where time folds in on itself, and the past refuses to stay buried. You know, sometimes the silence between the whispers is the most telling sound of all. What do you think lingers in the Alhambra's stillness, beyond the echoes of 1,000 lost voices? The walls remember, not just the stories, but the weight of every heart that once beat within them. Have you ever felt the past press against your own? The Alhambra doesn't just haunt, it hums. A low, ancient resonance that seems to come from the stones themselves. Have you ever heard it, or felt it in your bones? And yet, for all its sorrow, it's also a place of beauty, a testament to love, power, and the fleeting nature of time. What do you think the Alhambra wishes to tell us, if it still speaks at all? But we must leave, now. The night is growing long, and there are more stories waiting. Until next time, remember, the past is never truly gone, it just waits for the right moment to return. You ever heard of the Tower of London? A place where history and horror walk hand in hand. It's not just a castle, it's a tomb of secrets, a fortress of fear, and a home for spirits that won't let go. For centuries, this place has been a prison, a treasury, and a site of royal murder. But it's also where the dead stay. They linger in the corridors, in the cellars, in the very stones that hold their stories. The crown itself, those jewels, that regalia has been linked to strange deaths, disappearances, and unexplained events. Some believe the crown is cursed, that it holds the power to trap souls or summon something far older than kings. Now, imagine walking those halls, feeling the cold breath of the past on your neck. You're not just visiting a monument, you're stepping into a story that's still being written. One that's been told for centuries, and one that may still be waiting for its ending. You see, it all began in the year 1066, when William the Conqueror built this tower as a symbol of his power. It was a place of crowns, coronations, and crowns that never quite fit. The first crown was made of gold and adorned with precious stones, but it was the people who truly shaped its legacy. Queens, kings, and commoners alike left their marks on these stones. But the crown wasn't just a symbol of royalty, it was also a place of secrets where whispers of betrayal, love, and murder echoed through the stone halls. So many stories were told in these halls, and so many lives were lost. Some say the crown is haunted by the spirits of those who wore it, those who lost it, and those who tried to steal it. And that, dear listener, is how the hollow crown began, not with a scream, but with a crown, a king, and a promise that would never be fulfilled. You remember how the air felt that day, thick with the scent of damp stone and the faint tang of something older than the tower itself. The sun had barely broken through the clouds, and the crows were already making their eerie calls from the battlements. The guards had been uneasy all morning, whispering about the wind changing direction, and how it carried a sound like a child's laughter from the empty cellars below. It wasn't the wind, though there was no wind at all, just a stillness that made your skin prickle. Then came the first real sign, something that made the old men in the kitchen turn pale. A bell rang, not the one in the courtyard, but the one deep in the tower, the one they said no one had heard in over 100 years. The sound was followed by a voice, soft and familiar, calling from the darkness. Not a shout, not a scream, but a whisper like someone was trying to reach you and failing. And that's when the real fear began. Not the fear of the unknown, but the fear of being watched. You could feel it, like the weight of an unseen eye pressing against your own, and you knew you weren't alone in the tower anymore. You ever wonder what happens when a crown turns cold? The Tower of London held one such crown, but it vanished in the night, leaving behind only whispers and the cold, heavy silence of a room that never warmed again. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The crown was said to be the last of the Plantagenets, but it disappeared during the reign of Henry Roman VIII. A royal mystery wrapped in gold, it was never found, and the room where it vanished remains untouched by time. The room where it vanished became known as the Hollow Crown, for it was said to hold no warmth, no light, only the weight of a lost treasure and the echoes of a forgotten crown. To this day, the room is sealed, and the crown remains lost. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it whispering, waiting just beyond the veil of time. I've spoken to a few elderly residents who claim they've seen the ghost of a young girl in the old palace gardens. She's always dressed in a white dress, and her eyes seem to follow you as you walk by. One woman told me she heard a child's laughter echoing from the walls at midnight. She went to check, but the corridor was empty. The sound, however, never left her mind. Some claim to have seen a figure in a crown walking the battlements at dusk. They say it's the spirit of a king, lost in the weight of his crown and the silence of the past. There's also a tale of a woman who vanished in the 1700s, her body never found. Her last known location was the basement of the White Tower. Some say she's still there, waiting. And then there's the most chilling one, a man who swore he saw a crown floating in the air, just above the moat. He said it was made of blood and bone, and it vanished the moment he tried to reach for it. The investigation started with a single name, Richard Roman III, but the more we dug, the more names piled up. What began as a history lesson turned into something else entirely. We followed the breadcrumbs through centuries of records, and it all led to one chilling truth. The crown was never just a symbol. It was a prison, a place where secrets were buried and memories turned to dust. One document described a shadow in the mirror that watched the king as he slept. Another spoke of a child's laughter echoing through the stone corridors, no one ever knowing where it came from. We found no bodies, no direct evidence, just a trail of whispers and unease. But the crown had a way of keeping its secrets, and the tower had a way of remembering. What we uncovered wasn't a ghost, it was a story, layered with fear, power, and the weight of time. And the crown, it seems, still holds its breath. You've heard the tales of the crown jewels, the bloody tower, the whispers in the stone. But there's one thing they never tell you: what happened to the ruby that vanished in the 18th century. Was it stolen? Lost? Or did it simply disappear, like the ghost of a king? No one knows where the ruby went. Not the curators, not the historians, not even the ghosts. Some say it was taken by a royal lover. Others claim it was cursed. But the truth, it's buried in the silence of the archives, where no one dares to look. That's the thing. No one ever found it. Not the thieves, not the investigators, not even the ghosts. It's like the ruby never existed, or maybe it was never meant to be found. So here's your final question. If you were standing in that room, in the cold, the silence, and the weight of a mystery that has never been solved, what would you do? Would you look? Would you leave? Or would you find the ruby? You've heard the stories of the crown jewels, but did you know the tower's walls still hum with the voices of those who died in their making? Some say the crown's weight isn't just in gold, but in the souls it's stolen from. Local legends say the crown was forged in a place where blood and gold mingled, and that the king who wore it never truly left his throne. He's still there, in the stones, watching over his own. You might think the crown is just a relic, but to those who live near the tower, it's a living thing. Some say it moves in the night, shifting its weight as if trying to escape the hands that hold it. And then there are the ones who say the crown was never meant to be worn at all, that it was a prison for a king's soul, and the tower is just the final chamber of his endless, silent reign. You know, the tower's not just haunted by kings and queens, it's haunted by the people who were forgotten, the ones who never made it into history books, the ones who were silenced. And the truth? It's still waiting to be heard. There's a name that's been whispered in the stones for centuries, Lady Jane Grey. But the story we know, it's just a shadow of what really happened. What if she wasn't the traitor they made her out to be? Some say the tower holds more than just ghosts. Some say it holds the weight of secrets that refuse to be buried. And some say those secrets are still alive, waiting for someone to listen. So next time you're there, don't just look at the crown jewels. Look deeper, listen closer, and maybe, just maybe, the tower will whisper its truth to you. You've walked the cobbled streets of a city where time seems to bend, where history whispers through stone and shadow. And now, as the clock chimes, you're left with the question, what lingers when the last light fades? The tower's secrets may be buried, but the air still hums with the weight of the past. You feel it, don't you? That subtle chill, like a hand brushing your shoulder just before the lights go out. And so, as the wind picks up and the trees whisper in the distance, you turn the page, or the dial, and step into the next tale where the past refuses to stay buried. But don't forget, the tower's story isn't over. It's just waiting for you to listen, one whisper at a time. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place where whispers of the occult have echoed for centuries. It's not just a building, it's a legacy, a secret buried beneath centuries of stone and silence. Nestled in the hills of France, it's a place where history and mystery blend like wine. Some say it was a refuge for scholars. Others claim it was a hideout for secret societies. But one thing is certain, it's never been empty. Some say the priory was cursed the moment its first stone was laid. Others believe it was a place where knowledge was hidden, and those who sought it too deeply found themselves lost in its labyrinth of secrets. It's not just the stories that haunt this place. It's the silence. The way the wind whispers through the stones like a voice from the past, and the way the shadows seem to move when no one is there. So, what do you think? Was it a sanctuary, a secret, or something far darker? We'll uncover the truth, one story at a time. But first, let's walk through the doors and into the past. You've heard the whispers of the Priory of Sion, but do you know where it all began? It started in the heart of the Pyrenees, in a secluded valley where the mountains guard secrets as fiercely as they guard the sky. The first monks came not for riches, but for refuge. They were scholars, mystics, and scribes, bound by a vow to protect knowledge from the darkness of the age. Their mission was quiet, but their impact was profound. They were more than monks, they were guardians of the sacred, protectors of the light in a world that feared it. Their mission was to preserve the wisdom of the ancients, even at the cost of their own lives. But even the strongest walls can't guard against time. The Priory of Sion was not just a place, it was a legacy, a secret passed through generations, and a history that would one day be unearthed, like dust from an old, forgotten tomb. You remember how the air felt that first night, like it had been holding its breath for years. The wind wasn't just cold, it was whispering. The old woman who lived next door said the trees had grown taller since the priory was abandoned. But they hadn't just grown, they had leaned, like bowing to something unseen. One morning, the mailman found a letter on his porch, addressed to no one. It was written in a hand that hadn't touched paper in decades, unless it had been writing all along. The first time the clock tower struck midnight, it didn't chime. It groaned like a beast waking from a long, restless sleep. And then it began to count. By the time the first snow fell, the garden had turned to glass. The roses were still blooming, but their petals had become mirrors, reflecting something that wasn't there. You followed the whispers of the Priory of Sion through centuries of secrecy. But now we come to the heart of the matter. One night in the late 16th century, a young scholar vanished without a sound, leaving only his ink-stained quill and a locked diary. The townsfolk say he was taken by the devil, but there's more to it. The diary was found days later, its pages filled with frantic scrawls about a hidden chamber beneath the chapel and a warning that the truth would cost more than his life. They found the chamber, but not the man. Only a single candle, still burning, and a pool of blood that hadn't dried in over a century. The silence was louder than any scream. To this day, the chamber remains sealed. Some say the scholar's spirit still walks those halls, searching for the truth he was too afraid to write. Others believe the priory's curse lives on in the silence between the lines of that forgotten diary. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. I remember the first time I heard the name Priory of Sion. It was whispered over coffee at a senior center, like a secret only the brave could carry. The woman who told me had eyes like storm clouds and a voice that trembled like old leaves in the wind. She spoke of a place where time bends and memories are haunted, a place where the air feels heavier and the silence speaks louder than any sound, the kind of silence that lingers in your bones long after you've left. One visitor swore he heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls at midnight. He said it was sweet and innocent, but the next morning his own child had vanished from their bed, never to be found. Another claimed to see a figure in the garden, wearing a white dress and a crown of thorns. She was weeping, but when he approached, she simply vanished into the mist, like a dream that fades before it can be grasped. These are not just stories. They are echoes carried on the wind, waiting to be heard. And sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. It calls to us, like a lullaby we never wanted to hear again. We followed the trail of whispers to a crumbling stone library, where dust clung to every surface like a memory waiting to be remembered. The air smelled of old paper and something faintly metallic, as if the past had seeped into the very walls. One note, dated the day the last monk vanished, spoke of a presence that watches, but does not speak. It was the first time we felt the weight of the unseen. As we left the library, the wind picked up, and the trees seemed to whisper in a language we could almost understand. The investigation had only begun, but already, the past was reaching out, eager to be remembered. You ever wonder what happens when a secret is too big to hold? The Priory of Sion had one detail that no one could ever explain. The name that wasn't there. It was a name that should have been there, in the records, in the archives, in the very foundation of the Priory, but it wasn't. Just missing. Like someone had erased it with a needle and salt. That one missing name became the last thread of the Priory's story. A whisper in the dark, a question without an answer, and a secret that still lingers in the silence. And so, the Priory of Sion remains, a place of mystery, a monument to the power of secrets, and a reminder that some truths are better left buried. You've heard the tales of the Priory, but what about the people who still live here? Some say the wind carries the whispers of the old masters through the cobbled streets, and the locals still avoid the old gate at dusk. There's a legend about the stone archway in the square. They say if you touch it at midnight, it'll show you the truth, but the truth, they say, is never what you expect. And then there are the theories. Some say the Priory was never destroyed. Some say the monks hid the truth in the walls, in the stones, in the very air we breathe. The most persistent story is that the Priory's curse is still alive, waiting for someone to wake it. And if you're not careful, it might wake you too. And yet, the mystery remains, unresolved, a thread left dangling in the dark. No one can say for sure what happened in the Priory's final days. Some say the last records were burned, others claim they were hidden. But the truth, it's still buried beneath centuries of silence and fear. We've searched the archives, dug through the soil, and followed the whispers of the past. But the Priory's final secret? It's still waiting, like a ghost in the dark. Perhaps the real curse isn't the ghosts, but the silence that lingers after the last scream. The silence that says, this is not over. So, my dear listeners, as you turn off your lights tonight, ask yourself what secrets are still waiting for you in the dark. You've been walking through the shadows of history, and now you're standing at the edge of another mystery. What if the past isn't just behind us, but inside us, waiting to be remembered? The Priory of Sion may be buried in time, but its whispers live on. Sometimes, the oldest secrets are the ones that refuse to stay quiet. So, as we turn the page, remember this, the past isn't gone. It's just waiting for you to listen. And sometimes, it's not so far away. Now, let's gather our courage and step into the next story. Who knows what secrets await in the silence? You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a haunted church? Blythburgh Church, tucked in the quiet English countryside, has a history that whispers like the wind. Built over 1,000 years ago, its walls have seen centuries of prayers, weddings, and some say unquiet spirits. It's not just a place of worship, it's a story etched in stone. Legends say the church is haunted by the ghost of a medieval priest who vanished under mysterious circumstances. But the real mystery is why the place still feels so alive, even now. Some say the echoes you hear at dusk are not just the sound of the wind, but the voices of those who once prayed here, waiting for someone to listen. So, as we light the fire and pour the tea, let's step into the silence of Blythburgh Church and listen for the stories it still holds. You see that ancient stone, worn smooth by time, just beneath the church steps? That's where it all began. A place where prayers were said, and where the first whispers of something darker started to rise. The church was built in the 12th century, a time when faith was the only compass, and the world was filled with both wonder and fear. It was here that the first rumors of the Blithberg ghost began to circulate. The first recorded mention of the ghost was in 1584, when a local farmer claimed to see a woman in white walking the graveyard at midnight. He said she looked unsettled, as if she was trying to reach someone who was already gone. It's said that the woman was a nun who died in the 1400s, trapped in a cruel marriage and forced to take vows of silence. Her spirit, they say, still wanders the church, searching for the voice she was never allowed to have. The stories grew, and so did the fear. Some said she was a curse, others a warning, but all agreed on one thing: the church was haunted, and the echoes of its past were never far from the present. And so, the Blithberg Church became more than a place of worship, it became a place of mystery, a place where the past refused to stay buried. You know how sometimes the wind feels like it's whispering secrets? Well, that's exactly what happened that first night. It was like the church itself was trying to tell us something, but in a language we couldn't quite understand. The rector had said the place was quiet, but the air felt heavy, as if the walls were holding their breath. It was a silence so deep, it made your skin prickle in a way that wasn't just cold. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum, like the church was singing to itself. It wasn't the kind of sound that made you jump, but the kind that made you feel like you were being watched from the dark. And then, just as the hum faded, there was a whisper, not from the wind, not from the walls, but from the air itself. It was like the church was trying to say something, and it was just out of reach. You can almost hear it now, can't you? That whisper, that hum, that heavy silence. It's the first sign that something was terribly wrong and that we were never truly alone in this place. You know, sometimes the most terrifying things aren't what you see, but what you feel. The wind in the churchyard, the creak of the bell tower, those are the sounds that linger long after the sun has set. In 1946, a young woman named Margaret Henshaw vanished without a trace. She'd been visiting her grandmother, who lived nearby, and left in the morning with a basket of bread. The last anyone saw of Margaret was her walking toward the church, her basket in hand. Her mother claimed she had only said, "I'll be back soon," and then silence. No body was ever found, no trace of her clothes, no signs of struggle, just a basket left in the same spot, as if she had simply vanished into the air. To this day, the wind still howls through the churchyard as if carrying her voice. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear her name, Margaret, whispered just before the wind dies. I've heard from a retired school teacher who once visited Blithberg in the early 90s. She said the air felt heavy, like the church was holding its breath. She swore she saw a shadow move behind the altar just before the bell tolled. Another visitor claimed they heard a child's laughter echoing through the nave at midnight. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't part of the old hymns. The sound was too clear, too real, and too lonely. A local librarian, who's lived here for decades, told me she once saw a figure in the stained glass window, looking straight at her. It wasn't the saints or the angels, it was a woman, in a dark dress, eyes full of sorrow. And then there's the man who said he saw a hand reach out from the pulpit. He was there for a wedding, and the hand was pale, almost transparent, and it stayed out for a full minute before vanishing into the wood. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. These aren't just stories. They're echoes, lingering in the stones, waiting for someone to listen. Have you ever heard something that wasn't meant for you? We began our investigation at the church's back door, where the air felt heavier than the rest of the place. The scent of damp stone and old incense clung to the walls like a memory waiting to be remembered. The first clue was a faint, repeating sound like a child's laughter echoing through the stone. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't gone either, just there, lingering like a ghost of a tune. In the sacristy, we found a locked iron box buried beneath the floorboards. It was sealed with a rusted lock, but inside, we found a child's drawing crayon on paper, faded and frayed, with a message written in shaky letters. Please find me. The most unsettling thing was the temperature. The air in that room was colder than anywhere else in the church, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. We left the box untouched, but the sound followed us home. It was like the church had a way of whispering secrets only to those who were willing to listen. You know, the thing that haunts me most isn't the whispers or the cold, but this one little detail that's never been explained. You ever wonder what really happened to the priest who vanished in the 1930s? They found his shoes by the altar, but not a single trace of him. Not a hair, not a button, just his shoes. Like he'd walked straight into the stone and disappeared. You ever think about that? Walking into the wall and vanishing? Some say the church is cursed, that it's a place where the veil between worlds is thin. But what if it's not the church that's cursed? What if the church is just a mirror, and the real mystery is what he saw when he walked through that door? No one knows what he saw. No one knows why he walked through that door, but if you ever find yourself standing in that church listening to the wind, you might just hear him. And then you'll wonder what if he's still there. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the church doesn't just echo with the wind, but with the voices of the past. Some say it's the priest's wife, others say it's the child who vanished without a trace. Some locals swear the bell tower rings on its own, especially when the moon is full. They say it's not the bell that's calling, but someone inside trying to get out. And then there are the children, the ones who say they saw a shadow in the pews or heard laughter when no one was there. The older folks just smile and say, that's just the church remembering its own. But the truth, that's what they say you can't find. Not in the records, not in the history books. Just in the silence, and the echoes, and the way the wind still sounds like someone is calling. You've heard the stories, but what about the silence that followed? Some say the church didn't just lose a child, it lost a piece of itself. No one knows for sure what happened that night. Some say it was an accident, others a tragedy, but no one knows what truly took the child. The church still stands, but the echoes of that night remain. You can almost hear it in the wind, the creak of the pews, the way the light lingers just a moment too long. Some say the child's spirit never left. Others say the church is still waiting for an answer. And some say the truth is still hidden in the silence. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Did you ever notice how the wind carries whispers through the cracks of old stone? There's something about the way the light lingers just a moment too long on a forgotten altar, as if the past is still waiting to be acknowledged. So, as we turn the page to the next tale, remember that even in the deepest quiet, something is always listening. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I just heard a faint echo from somewhere inside. You've heard of the Jersey Shore, but have you ever wondered what lies beneath the waves? This place isn't just about sun, sand, and surf. It's got a dark undercurrent, like a secret the ocean won't let go of. It's a place where the air feels heavier, the wind carries whispers, and the waves seem to pull secrets from the deep. You can almost hear the ocean murmuring, like it's telling you something you're not meant to understand. You've heard the stories, but have you ever stopped to think about what they mean? Maybe the Jersey Shore isn't just a place, it's a threshold, a line between the known and the unknown, where the real world fades and something else takes its place. So, what's your story, dear listener? Have you ever felt that pull, that strange sense that you're being watched? Or have you ever wondered what lies beneath the surface of this place we call home? You ever heard of the Jersey Shore? It's not just boardwalks and ice cream. Back in the 1950s, this place was a sleepy fishing town, but it became the scene of something truly dark. It started with a series of disappearances. People went missing without a trace, and the local police were useless. No bodies, no clues, just cold cases that haunted the town for years. There were rumors of a local cult, of secret rituals, of a curse tied to the tides. But no one could prove it. The town covered it up, and the truth was buried with the bodies. Even today, the Jersey Shore is still haunted by these missing souls. Their stories live on in the wind, the waves, and the silence that falls when the sun sets over the water. You ever notice how the first hints of trouble are always the quietest? Like a lull in the storm before the thunder. That's how it started here, just a whisper of something off, a feeling that the waves weren't just lapping against the shore anymore. The locals said it was just a bad tide, a shift in the moon's pull. But there were signs, marks on the sand, faint and strange, like someone had dragged something heavy through the surf. You can almost see the tracks if you squint. The town tried to brush it aside, but the unease grew. People began to leave, saying they felt watched, followed, or just not safe. It wasn't just the sea anymore, it was the silence between the waves that made them uneasy. And then came the first real sign. Not a ghost, not a shadow, but something that made the town hold its breath. A body was found, half submerged in the sand, with no clear cause of death, and no way to tell how it got there. That's when the real fear began. Not for the dead, but for the living. Because the sea had started to show its hand, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. You remember the summer nights, when the sky was heavy with thunder and the air smelled like salt and fear. That was when the disappearances began, not with screams, but with silence. They vanished in the early hours, leaving behind only their clothes and the weight of something unseen. No bodies, no clues, just the echo of a name whispered by the tide. The townsfolk tried to ignore it, to pretend the sea had no teeth, but the water remembered. Some say the waves pulled them under, others say the sand swallowed them whole, and still others say they were never there at all. No one knows for sure what happened, but we do know this: the Jersey Shore has a memory, and it's not one you want to wake up from. I spoke with a local fisherman who said he saw a shadowy figure on the boardwalk at midnight, walking with a limp and holding a piece of something that looked like a belt. He said it vanished the moment he tried to get a closer look, and the wind picked up like it was trying to erase what he saw. A woman who lived nearby said she heard screams coming from the beach at 2 a.m. but when she went to check, there was nothing but the tide and the sound of her own heartbeat. She said the screams didn't sound like people, they sounded like something that had been hurt and had no idea where it was. And then there was the teenager who said he saw a figure in the woods near the old amusement park, holding something that looked like a rope and crying like it was the end of the world. He said the figure looked like it was waiting for someone, and when he ran away, it vanished into the trees like it had never been there at all. The investigators found a series of old police reports tucked away in a dusty filing cabinet. Some of them were missing pages, and others had been redacted with thick black ink. It was like someone had tried to erase the truth. One report mentioned a man who had disappeared near the boardwalk. His last known location was a convenience store where he bought a soda. The store owner swore he never saw him again. The most puzzling thing was his set of photographs. They were grainy and old, but they showed a group of people standing in a spot that now looks like a parking lot. One person was missing from the photo, and the others had all been reported missing years before. There were no clear leads, no suspects, and no closure. The investigation had only deepened the mystery. It was as if the shore itself had swallowed the truth and buried it beneath the sand. You know, there's one thing that has never been explained: why the victims were found with their hands tied behind their backs. It's not like they were in a struggle, not like they were running. It's like they were waiting. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40-oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say it was a message, a sign that they were taken for a reason. Others say it was a way to make sure they couldn't escape. But no one knows for sure. It's just one more thing that lingers. And that's what makes it so strange. No one saw them being taken. No one heard a scream. Just hands tied, and a silence that never fades. It's like they were never really there, like they were always meant to be found like this. Waiting, watching, and never speaking. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered why the Jersey Shore keeps whispering about the missing? Maybe it's not just the sea, it's the land itself, holding on to something it can't forget. Some say the victims were never truly gone, that their presence lingers in the tides, in the silence between the waves. Others believe the shore was just a place where bad things happened, not a place where they were taken. You know the old saying, the water takes what it wants. Maybe that's not just a warning, but a truth. The shore may have claimed them, but it doesn't let go so easily. Some locals still swear they've seen a figure in the dark, walking the shoreline with no shoes, no coat, just a quiet, purposeful stride. They say it's not looking for anything, it's waiting. And so the shore remains, a place of beauty and mystery. But in its beauty, it holds a secret that won't let go. You've heard the stories, now ask yourself, what if they're true? You know, sometimes the hardest part of a mystery isn't finding the truth, it's letting go of the hope that there will be one. These cases don't just fade away. They linger, like a ghost in the corner of your eye, waiting for you to look again. We keep coming back to these places, hoping to find something, anything that might help us understand what happened. And maybe that's the real mystery. Why do we keep searching when the answers have long since vanished? You know, sometimes the worst things happen in the quietest places. Like the shore, where the waves whisper secrets and the sand holds memories. What do you think lingers in the silence? The ocean is a mirror, but it doesn't always show what's real. Sometimes it shows what's been left behind, pieces of a story that refuse to be forgotten. Have you ever felt the pull of something you couldn't explain? There's a beauty in the unknown, isn't there? The way the wind carries voices, the way the tide pulls back like it's holding its breath. What do you think the shore is trying to tell us? So, if you're listening, I wonder, what do you think the shore has hidden? What do you think it's waiting for? And what do you think you'll find if you keep listening? You've heard the names, but have you ever stood beneath a stone where history bleeds? The Tower of London, those cold, proud walls hold secrets older than the crown itself. For centuries, it's been a prison, a treasury, a symbol of power, but also a place where whispers of blood and betrayal echo through the cobbles. They say the air here is heady with the weight of the past, like the walls remember every life that was lost within them. But what really haunts this place isn't just the ghosts of kings and queens, it's the ballads, the songs that tell of betrayal, of blood, and of a place where even the stones weep. And now, as you stand here listening, you might wonder, what stories are still waiting to be sung in the stillness of the night? You know, the Tower of London wasn't always a place of chains and whispers. Back in 1100, it was a mighty fortress built by William the Conqueror. Imagine, if you will, a place where the air was thick with the scent of stone and ambition, and the walls held secrets that would outlive the kings who built them. But it wasn't just a military stronghold. You see, the tower was also a prison, a treasury, and a place where the crown's most dangerous secrets were kept. It's where the jewels of England were guarded, and where some of the most powerful people in the world were held for their crimes against the king. Now, if you're curious, you might think, what kind of people ended up here? Well, let's just say the tower was a place where the powerful were both protected and imprisoned. Some were there for treason, others for their love of the king's wife, or for simply being too rich and too ambitious. But here's the thing, dear listener, the tower was not just built by men. It was also shaped by the women who were forced to marry kings, the queens who were deposed, and the women who were imprisoned for their own sins or their husbands' crimes. They left their mark, and their stories linger in the stones. And so, the tower became more than a fortress. It became a symbol of power, of betrayal, of love and death. It was where the crown's secrets were kept, and where the souls of those who were wronged found a place to rest, even if only in the whispers of the wind. You know, sometimes the worst things start with a whisper, a sigh in the wind, a rustle in the leaves, or the sound of a child's laughter that just stops. That's how it began, you see. A single, unexplained note played on a piano in the old palace, like someone had been trying to reach out. The next morning, the maids found a small, blood-stained handkerchief tucked into the cushions of the royal throne. No one knew where it came from, and no one dared ask. It was just another day in the tower, you see, full of secrets and silence. Then came the dreams. Not just dreams, but visions. Visions of a woman in a crimson gown, standing at the window, whispering names that no one could remember. They said her voice was like wind through the stones, and it made your bones ache. The keepers began to leave strange offerings at the foot of the stairs, flowers, small trinkets, even a lock of hair. They said they were trying to appease the spirit, but I think they were just trying to forget it was there. And then, one night, the bells rang without warning. Not the great bells of the tower, but the small, silent ones, the ones that had not rung in decades. The sound was like a heartbeat, slow and heavy, and it made the walls tremble. That's when they started to wonder if the tower was still listening, if it had ever been silent at all, and if it had been waiting, all along. You know, the tower wasn't just a prison for kings, it was a prison for women too. And some of them, well, they never came out. You ever wonder what happened to the ones who vanished without a trace? One such woman was a maid named Eleanor, who disappeared during the reign of Henry Roman VIII. She'd been assigned to clean the bloody tower, and the last anyone saw of her was her footprints in the blood-stained floorboards. No one knows what happened to her. Some say she was murdered by the king's men, others claim she was taken by the ghosts of those who died in the tower. But the footprints, they still remain, waiting for someone to step on them again. And if you ever find yourself wandering those halls at night, you might hear her whispering your name. Or maybe not, but the silence, that's the real warning. So next time you're in London, don't forget to look for the footprints. They're waiting for you, and they've been waiting a long, long time. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have seen the tower's ghosts, but one story sticks with me. A woman in the 1970s said she saw a woman in a blood-stained gown wandering the courtyard at midnight. She ran, but the figure followed, whispering in a voice like wet paper. Another man, a retired soldier, said he once saw the ghost of a young girl in the White's Tower. She was holding a tiny, bloody dagger, and her eyes were full of sorrow. He said she didn't speak, but he felt her pain in his chest. One woman said she saw a man with a crown on his head walking alone through the gardens. He didn't look up, but he stopped when she did. She said he looked exactly like the king who was executed there, and his eyes were full of something she can't explain. And then there's the sailor who swore he saw a ghostly figure in the moat. It was holding a lantern, and the light made the water ripple like it was alive. He said the figure was trying to reach someone, but the moat was too deep, and the water was too cold. These accounts are not just stories. They're echoes of the past, whispering through the stones. And sometimes, they're trying to tell us something we've forgotten. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, where the dust had settled on old ledgers and letters. The tower's ghosts were not just in the stones, but in the ink. A ledger from 1548 spoke of a woman who vanished after a royal banquet. Her name was never recorded, but the accounts said she left with a crown of thorns and a song that echoed in the halls. We found no body, but the records told of a ritual performed under the full moon, a dance of shadows and silver, where the living and the dead were said to meet. The deeper we looked, the more the past seemed to whisper back. Some say the tower still holds its secrets, waiting for the right hand to turn the page. You ever wonder why some stories refuse to die? Well, the Tower of London has a secret it won't let go of, one detail that's always been there, but never explained. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It's not the ghosts or the torture chambers or the crown jewels that baffle us. It's a single, unaccounted for drop of blood. One drop, in the right place, at the right time. Some say it's the blood of a king. Others say it's the blood of a queen. But the truth, no one's ever been able to say for sure. Not even the historians. Not even the ghosts. So here's the thing. If you're listening, and you feel something in your chest, you're not imagining it. That drop of blood is waiting for someone to finally ask the question that no one's dared to ask. You ever heard the tale of the white lady who haunts the tower? Some say she's the ghost of Anne Boleyn, others insist she's a different soul entirely. Either way, she's never been seen without her blood-stained veil. There are rumors that the white lady appears only to those who whisper her name in the dark, and if you're not careful, she might not be the only one who's seen. Theories abound, of course. Some say the tower is cursed by the blood of kings, others believe it's a prison for the souls of those who died unjustly, but I'm not sure any of it matters. What matters is what's left behind. You know, I think the real mystery isn't who died here, or why. It's the silence. The way the tower just keeps breathing, even when the world has moved on. And sometimes, that's the scariest thing of all. You know, the real mystery isn't just the ghost, it's the missing pieces. The crown jewels are there. But what about the crown that once sat on Henry Roman VIII's head? Some say it vanished in the chaos of the Reformation, and no one's ever found it. And then there's the White Tower itself. Its stones still whisper the names of those who died in its shadow. Some say the echoes are louder at night, when the wind whistles like a morning song. So here's the question, what's more haunting? The ghost who haunts the tower, or the truth that refuses to be told? Either way, the tower's story isn't over, and neither is its legend. And if you ever find yourself in London, don't be surprised if the wind carries a song. It might just be the tower singing its ballad still, and never quite done. As the echoes of the past fade, I wonder if the tower still listens for the voices of those who once called it home. Have you ever felt the weight of history in a place that never sleeps? There's a silence here that doesn't feel empty, it feels like it's waiting for something. Like the walls remember every whisper, every tear, every secret that was never meant to be told. And as the sun dips below the horizon, I wonder, does the tower still sing its ancient ballads, or has it grown quiet, listening for the next story to unfold? Well, I'll leave you with that thought and a promise that the next tale will be just as haunting. Until then, stay warm, stay curious, and keep your ears open for the stories that linger in the dark. You ever wonder what happens when a secret older than the church gets buried beneath a crumbling stone wall? The Priory of Sion isn't just a name, it's a place where whispers of the past refuse to die. Nestled in the hills of France, this priory was once a refuge for those who knew too much. They called it a sanctuary, but the silence there is too heavy, too deep for comfort. Local legends say the priory still holds the echoes of those who vanished, scholars, mystics, and monks who dared to keep secrets from the church. And some say the walls still remember. You think you know about haunted places, but this one's different. It's not just about ghosts, it's about what they're guarding, and why the silence is louder than any scream. You know, the Priory of Sion wasn't just a name, it was a real place, tucked away in the hills of France, where the air smells like old stone and the silence is heavy with secrets. It started in the 12th century, when a noble family decided to build a refuge for scholars and thinkers. The first people who lived there were not just monks or nobles, but a group of scholars, scientists, and philosophers, thinkers who dared to question the church. They brought with them books, ideas, and a kind of dangerous curiosity that would outlive the walls of the priory. But even in those days, there was danger. The church didn't like people who challenged its authority. The priory became a target, and its history is one of secret meetings, hidden manuscripts, and the quiet courage of those who refused to let knowledge die. Some say the priory was destroyed by fire, others that it was abandoned when its secret became too dangerous to keep. But no one knows for sure. What we do know is that its legacy lives on in whispers and the faintest trace of something that still lingers in its walls. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right, don't you? It was the way the wind shifted just as you turned your head, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then came the whispers so faint you could almost believe they were just your own imagination, but they lingered like dust in the air, never quite disappearing. And then, the cold, not the kind that comes from the window or the draft, but a deep, bone-chilling chill that settled in your chest, like the air had been touched by something ancient and unforgiving. You started to notice the patterns, how the light never quite reached the corners, how the dust settled in strange shapes, like something had been there, waiting. It was subtle at first, like a warning in the shape of a sigh, but you knew, deep in your bones, that something had already begun to stir. You ever wonder what happens when a secret is so deep, it buries a whole family? The last time someone saw the priory's last heir, she was standing at the edge of the moat, staring at the water like it held the answers. She didn't come back. No body was ever found, just the echo of her voice, carried by the wind, whispering, "They're still here." The moat was her last message, a warning, but by then, the family was already gone, and the priory was left to the silence of centuries. They say the moat isn't just water, it's a mirror, and if you look too long, you might see her waiting for someone to come back. So if you ever find yourself near the priory, and you hear a voice calling your name, don't look back. Not if you value your sanity. I remember the way the wind howled through the stone corridors, like it was trying to carry a secret away. One woman said she heard her own voice echoing in the halls, but it wasn't her. It was someone else's, whispering her name. Another told me she saw a figure in the garden, wearing a white dress, but when she turned, there was nothing. Just the cold, the silence, and the scent of old roses that had long since withered. And then there was the man who claimed he saw a mirror in the library, but when he looked into it, his reflection wasn't himself. It was someone else, and they were smiling at him. Some said the place remembers, that it holds on to the pain, the secrets, and the souls that were never laid to rest, and that it waits for the right person to come back and finish what was started. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself wandering through the old world, be sure to listen closely. Sometimes, the truth is not in what you see, but in what you hear, and what you feel in your bones. We followed the trail of whispers to a dusty archive in Lyon, where the scent of old paper and candle wax clung to the air like a ghost's breath. Among the brittle pages, we found a name that had been erased, a symbol that had been scratched out, as if someone had tried to silence the past. The more we dug, the more the walls seemed to close in, as if the priory itself was whispering, "You're not the first to come looking." One night, as we left, the light flickered, and for a moment, the shadows on the wall seemed to move not just in the dark, but asterisk with asterisk it. The investigation was never about ghosts. It was about the people who came before us and the secrets they left behind, waiting to be found. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about the Priory of Sion. It's not the ghosts, not the secrets, not even the rumors. It's the one detail that has never been explained. They say the Priory was founded in the 12th century, but no one can confirm exactly when or by whom. Some say it was a secret society, others say it was a hiding place for sacred relics. But here's the thing, no one has ever been able to say for sure what the priory was truly hiding. Some think it was a secret library, others believe it was a place of forbidden knowledge. And yet, the most fascinating part is that no one has ever found any proof. It's like the priory was never really there at all, just a whisper in the dark. So, what do you think? Was it a cover for something ancient, or was it just a place that was never meant to be found? You've heard the rumors, but do you really believe them? Some say the Priory of Sion is cursed, others claim it's a place where the past never fades. What do you think the stones remember? There's talk of a secret brotherhood that once gathered here, hiding truths too dangerous to share. Some say they vanished, others say they're still watching from the shadows. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub 5th smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Local elders say the wind carries voices through the stone corridors, not of the living, but of those who once called this place home. Have you ever heard them? Some say the Priory of Sion is a place where time folds in on itself. You might walk through its halls and find yourself standing where you started, but something has changed. In the end, the truth may never be known, but if you ever find yourself standing in that shadowed doorway, remember, the past doesn't stay buried. It waits. You see it now, don't you? That lingering sense that something just isn't right. A feeling that this place isn't just haunted, it's holding its breath, waiting for something to wake up. The files are still sealed, the truth still buried. Some say the priory's secrets are too dangerous to unearth. Others believe the silence is the real curse, a warning that the past is not done with us. What if the priory wasn't just a place of secrets, but a prison for something that never left? What if the walls are still whispering and the silence is just the sound of something waiting to be found? And so, the story lingers like a whisper in the dark, a question that won't let go, and a place that won't forget, until someone dares to look deeper and the silence finally breaks. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that whisper from the silence between the lines, not the screams that echo through the halls. The Priory of Sion may be quiet now, but the echoes of its past still linger in the air like the last note of a forgotten lullaby. Let's not forget, the best stories are the ones that make you look over your shoulder long after the light has gone out. So, as we leave the priory behind, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes, the most powerful ghosts are the ones you can't see at all. Until next time, stay warm, stay curious, and don't let the dark take you by surprise. You've heard of the Hanged Man Inn, haven't you? That old place on the edge of town, where the road bends and the trees whisper secrets. It's said to be haunted by the souls of the people it once held. Built in the 1800s, it was once a place of refuge, but also of punishment. They hanged men there, and the whispers say their souls never left. Some say the wind carries their voices, singing in the night. The locals still tell stories of the hollow choir, a ghostly sound that echoes through the halls, a haunting melody that seems to come from nowhere and nowhere at all. It's not a sound you can ignore, but one you might wish you could. Some say the choir is the souls of the hanged, still singing their last lullabies. Others say it's the ghost of the innkeeper, still trying to atone for the lives he took. Either way, it's a sound that haunts more than just the ears. If you're ever in the area, be warned. Don't stay past dusk. The hollow choir doesn't just play at night, it lingers, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. And that's how the stories begin. You ever heard of a place where the air feels like it's holding its breath? That's how it started here. A small town, nestled in the woods with a jail that didn't just hold people, it held secrets. The sheriff here was a man with a temper and a heart full of regret. He locked up the wrong man, and the truth, it never came out. The town turned on him, and he ended up hanging himself in that cell. But the real tragedy, the man's wife and child, they were left behind, and the town turned its back on them. The wife ended up in a mental asylum, and the child? He grew up to be the town's new sheriff, but he never forgot the place. The town tried to move on, but the past had a way of coming back. The sheriff's ghost started appearing in the cell, and the child? He started hearing voices, calling him by his father's name. And so, the Hanged Man Inn was built on that land with a promise to forget the past. But some secrets, like ghosts, never stay buried. The story only just begins. The first signs that something was terribly wrong came in the form of a note, folded in the pocket of the innkeeper's coat. It read, "You're not the first to ask about the choir." It wasn't the note itself that unsettled me, but the way the ink seemed to shift when I held it to the candlelight, as though it were alive. The next morning, the cook found a small, hollowed-out apple on the kitchen table, with a single black feather tucked inside. It was the same kind of apple that grew in the orchard behind the inn. She said she felt watched as she picked it up, and the feather fell from her hand as if it had a mind of its own. The apple was still warm to the touch. By the third day, the bell at the inn began to ring on its own, just before dawn. No one could hear it, but the sound echoed through the stone walls like a voice calling from the past. It was then I realized the silence had begun to speak, and the inn was no longer just a place, it was a memory, waiting to be remembered. You know, it's not the ghosts that haunt this place, it's the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall, but settles over you like a shroud. It's the kind that whispers of things left unsaid. One morning, a guest awoke to find his room empty, his belongings untouched, but his voice missing. He'd been speaking in his sleep, a low, mournful hum like a choir, but with no one singing. They called it the Hollow Choir, a group of young men, hanged for a crime they never committed. Their voices, once proud and defiant, now trapped in the walls, singing to anyone who would listen. And then, one by one, the guests began to vanish. Not gone, just missing. As if they'd been taken by the song, by the choir, by the silence that had been waiting so long to be heard. The innkeeper finally packed up and left. He said the voices didn't stop. He said they still hum, low and steady, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to finally sing back. I've spoken to several witnesses who swear they heard the choir at Hanged Man Inn. One woman said she woke in the middle of the night to a sound like 1,000 angels singing in perfect harmony. The voices weren't loud, just hauntingly clear, like they were coming from somewhere just beyond the walls. She said it stopped the moment she turned on the light. Another guest claimed to see a child's hand peeking out from a window, just before the wind howled and the lights went out. No one else saw it. There's even a local legend about a child who was never found after a storm, and now, every night, the inn echoes with their song. These stories don't prove anything, but they do make you wonder what if the choir isn't just a sound, but a warning. We followed the old map to the edge of the woods, where the trees leaned like conspirators, and the air smelled of damp earth and something else, something sweet and wrong. The structure itself was half buried, its stones worn smooth by time and tide. A single broken window glowed faintly, as if something inside had not yet given up. The names were of people who had vanished in the 1800s, but the dates didn't line up. Some were marked with a strange symbol, a tiny, hollow heart like they had been erased from history. We found a small, rusted bell tucked beneath the floorboards, its clapper still intact. When we rang it, a sound came back like a choir, but not quite human, and not quite real. The final clue was a painting, half hidden behind a loose panel. It showed a man hanging from a tree, his face serene, surrounded by children who looked like they were singing to him. You see, the thing is, no one really knows why the choir stopped. Some say the bells were silenced by the hand of God, others say the ghosts of the hanged men grew tired of singing. But no one ever asked the real question. What was the last song they sang before the silence fell? Some say the melody was a warning, a last whisper from the dead before the final silence. Others say it was the sound of a child's laughter or the echo of a woman's voice crying out from the past. But no one has ever heard it since. And yet, no one has ever been able to find the source of that sound. No one has ever heard it again. Just silence, thick as fog, and the weight of 100 unsung voices waiting for someone to ask the question they never dared to speak. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself standing in this place, and you hear a single note, just one, remember that it's not the sound of the bell. It's the sound of a story waiting to be told. Some say the choir isn't just voices, they're the breath of the hanged, trapped in the rafters, singing their final lullabies to the dark. Others insist it's just the wind, howling through the cracks like a ghostly wind chime. The inn's oldest guest, Mrs. Davenport, claims she once saw a child's doll hanging from the rafters, its eyes wide and glassy, the strings still tied in a tight knot. Some say the hanged man was a farmer, accused of witchcraft, and his last words were a curse on the inn. Others say it was a love triangle gone wrong, and the man's wife still lingers in the east wing. The real mystery, though, isn't who was hanged, it's why the choir keeps singing. Every night, at exactly midnight, the voices rise, and no one can explain why. But the inn's new owner, she's heard it too. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They say the hanged man's spirit can't rest until someone finds the missing locket. But some say it's not a locket, it's a name. And that name is still being whispered in the choir. You've heard the tales of the hanged man inn, but what about the silence that follows? The unanswered questions that still echo through these old stone walls. There are no bodies, no graves, no closure. Just the sound of children's laughter, too clear, too loud, too real when the house is supposed to be empty. The inn is closed now, but the mystery remains. No one dares to stay for long, and the locals keep their heads low when the wind howls through the trees. So what do you think? Are they still here? Or did they simply vanish, like the ones who came before them, into the dark of this place? The hollow choir still sings. But now, you're listening. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers. The hanged man inn isn't just a building, it's a memory, a sigh in the wind, a song that never ends. And if you ever find yourself wandering past the old road, listen closely. You might just hear them, those voices, soft as snowfall, singing a tune that never quite ends. But remember, my dear, the real ghosts are the ones who never let go, and sometimes they're the ones who never leave. So, if you ever feel a chill in the air, or hear a voice that knows your name, don't be afraid. Just remember, some stories are meant to be heard, and some are meant to stay. You've heard the name, but have you ever imagined the Tower of London as it was in the 14th century? A place of crowns and chaos where history and horror walked hand in hand. This was not just a prison for the royal family, it was a place where blood, betrayal, and betrayal's price were etched into every stone. Legends say that the air here still hums with the whispers of the dead princes, queens, and the souls of those who met their end in the shadow of this tower. But the blood here wasn't just from the past. Some say it runs deeper than history, seeping into the very bones of this place, waiting for the next story to be told. So, dear listener, what do you think? Is the tower a tomb, or a place where the past refuses to stay buried? You know, the tower began as a fortress, not a prison. King Edward I built it in the 13th century, a mighty stone wall to guard the realm. But the stones were soaked in blood, long before the executions began. The first prisoners were not noblemen or traders. They were the poor, the foreign, the ones who dared to cross the king's will. The tower was a place where the desperate met their doom. But the tower's true legacy wasn't just in its walls. It was in the people it took. The ones who vanished, the ones who whispered their names into the stones. Their stories are etched in the very foundation of this place. And then came the queens. The ones who ruled, the ones who were betrayed. The tower became more than a prison, it became a symbol of power, of cruelty, of a kingdom that would rather kill than let go. So you see, the tower was built on blood, but it was the blood of the people, not just the nobility. And every stone here carries a story, some whispered, some shouted, and some still waiting to be told. You remember the way the Thames hummed in the early hours, like a lullaby for the city's restless bones. It wasn't a wind that stirred the air that night, but something older, something that had been waiting. The first sign came in the form of a whisper, not from the wind, but from the stones beneath the bridge. A voice, soft as a sigh, calling your name. You turned, but there was no one there. Then the clocks started to chime. Not the bells of Westminster, but the sound of hands striking a clock face that didn't exist. You heard it in your bones, a rhythm too precise, too ancient, to be coincidence. The next day, the city was quiet. No one spoke of the night before, but the Thames had changed. The water was darker, thicker, as if something had been stirred up from the depths of its history. And then you saw it, a figure standing on the bridge back to you, wearing a gown of red and gold. They didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there, like a memory made flesh, waiting for you to remember what you had already forgotten. You've heard the legends, but now you're standing where the whispers grow louder. The tower's stones have seen more than kings, more than the blood of princes, more than the screams of the accused. What happened here, in this very chamber, was no accident. It was the year 1548, and the air was thick with fear. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as a young woman, barely 16, was dragged through these halls. Her name was Lady Jane Grey, and she was about to become the first of many to meet a cruel fate. Her story is one of betrayal, of love, of a crown that never fit. But the tower didn't care about the reasons, only about the blood that would stain its stones. And that blood, my dear, is still here, waiting to be remembered. Now, as you stand where she once stood, ask yourself, what truth lingers in the silence? What tale is still waiting to be told by the stones that have held so much? And what will you hear if you listen closely enough? I remember the first time I heard the towers whisper. It was a cold October night, and the wind howled like a lost soul through the stones. You ever notice how the old stones seem to breathe? They do, if you listen closely. One old man, a retired watchman, swore he saw a woman in white standing by the bloody tower. Her face was obscured, but her eyes, those eyes followed him all the way home. He never told anyone, but I think he is still haunted by it. There's a story about a child's laughter echoing through the halls at midnight. A school teacher from the 70s claimed to hear it every year on the anniversary of a royal execution. She said it was sweet, like a lullaby, but the sound always ended with a sob. And then there's the tale of the ghost who never leaves. A woman who was executed here, her spirit tied to the place she died. She walks the halls, her footsteps echoing, until the day she finds peace or someone else takes her place. These are not just stories. They are echoes of those who lived and died here. And sometimes they still want to be heard. We followed the trail of whispers to the crypt beneath the chapel, where the air felt heavier than the stone. The silence was so deep it seemed to hum with something waiting to be heard. One of the researchers, a young woman with a notebook and a quiet reverence, found a journal entry from 1548. It spoke of a woman's scream echoing through the halls, and a blood stain that never faded. Then came the voices, whispers in the corridor, low and urgent, like someone trying to warn us. We stopped, and for a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath. When we finally left, the air felt colder, and the silence was different, like the place had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to notice it was still alive. You ever wonder why the tower's ghosts are always whispering about the crown jewels? It's not just the weight of history, it's the weight of a secret they never let out. The crown jewels are safe, but the stories about them? They're like the tower itself, locked away, but never truly buried. The tower's ghosts have told us so many things, but this one detail, it's the one they won't let us solve. Maybe the crown jewels are just the beginning. Maybe the real mystery is the silence that follows every story told about them. So, what do you think? Is the tower hiding something, or is it just waiting for someone to finally listen? You know, some folks say the tower's ghosts aren't just royalty or prisoners. They're the common folk who built it, the ones who labored in the shadows, their voices lost in the stones. What if the true curse isn't in the blood, but in the silence? There's a tale that every time the wind howls through the tower's walls, it's the sound of 1,000 hands chipping away at the stone, their voices drowned out by time. You've heard that, haven't you? It's a reminder that the past never truly dies. Some say the true curse of the tower is not in the blood of kings, but in the blood of the people who built it. The ones who died in the quarries, the ones who were crushed under the weight of history. Their ghosts, they say, still cry out from the stones. And then there's the theory that the tower itself is alive, that it remembers every breath, every step, every whispered prayer, that the blood on its stones isn't just a saying, it's a memory, a warning, a curse. So, what do you think? Is the tower haunted by the dead, or by the weight of its own history? Or maybe it's just the wind, the stones, and the stories that keep it alive. And so, the mystery remains, like the echoes of the past still lingering in these ancient stones. Who was that woman in the red cloak? Was she a courtesan, a spy, or something more? We'll never know, not for sure. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The tower has kept its secrets for centuries, but some say it still whispers in the wind, trying to tell us something we're not meant to hear. Perhaps it was a warning, a message left behind by a woman who knew too much. Or perhaps it was a tragedy, a love that turned to loss, and a life that was never meant to end. We can only wonder, dear listeners, what truth still lies hidden in the shadows, and whether the tower will ever let it out. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.